Hello and welcome again to today's Facebook Live session where we will be looking at more IELTS reading dealing with 5 of the most common answering mistakes that candidates tend to make in this part of the test. Now, if you've been following me for the past few lessons, we've been looking at or we've been dealing with 5 of these common mistakes, particularly related to short answer questions, sentence completion, as well as summary completion tasks. So if you feel the need to catch up on all that you've missed, feel free to have a look at my YouTube channel, the IELTS Tutor, and you'll be able to find all the Facebook Live sessions that you may have missed over the past few weeks or so. So in today's video, in today's live session, I'm going to be talking about language that's related to the passage that we have already discussed over the past few weeks. But I'm going to be getting into that in just a second. Because for some people, if we've never met before, I am the IELTS tutor from the IELTStutor.com, and I am a former IELTS examiner as well, and I help IELTS candidates get through all the challenges and issues that are related to the IELTS test. I'm also the founder of the IELTStutor.edublogs.org, which is a blog that is all about tips and strategizing for doing well in the IELTS test. So, before we get started, if you're watching this, tag someone in the comments section if you feel that they should watch this broadcast. And before we go any further, click on that like button or heart button if you can hear me loud and clear. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, let's go over the lesson objectives for today's lesson. Now, as I've mentioned before, if you've been following the past few lessons, so by the end of those sessions, you will have been able to understand the common problems related to answering sentence and summary completion tasks, as well as short answer questions. At the same time, hopefully, you'll have been able to apply those easy solutions to this type of task in your own practice. At the same time, we have also practiced reading for gist, and we'll also be looking at that today. And for today's lesson, I'm hoping that that you'd be able to gain a general understanding of a written text or a passage without having to understand all of that unfamiliar vocabulary that you'll come across, especially in a long passage. Okay, so if you've been looking at the past few lessons, you will have known that we looked at the topic on the pursuit of happiness. And what we're going to be looking at today, firstly, is the factors that lead to people being happy. Now, as you can see here, I've listed a list of 6 possible factors that contribute to personal happiness. So if you would like to take some time, maybe a few seconds, to go through these factors and try to rank them in order of importance, how you think or how much you think they contribute to people's happiness. Okay, so you can, if you have a pen and paper handy, which is always a good idea for my lessons with you, it would be good for you to try to put number 1 as maybe the most important factor, to number 6 as being the least important. Okay, so I'll give you a few seconds to go over that. Let me start the timer. Let's try 30 seconds to be exact. Okay, now obviously different people will have different opinions about this, especially if you come from a very, very different background from other people. So there are no right or wrong answers for this. So it just basically depends on your own opinion or perspective. But these factors are quite important for you to consider if you ever have to write an essay on what factors contribute to personal happiness, or an interview part 3 question in which your examiner will ask you a question like, what do you think are the factors that make people happy? So you can use these ideas and the rank of importance that you've just done to talk about what you think contributes to people's happiness in general, or in your society, and so on, or personal happiness, if you want to talk about yourself. Okay, so before we move on, can you think of any other factors that also contribute to people's happiness, apart from this list of 6 factors that you've seen here? Okay, can you think of any other factors that you could add to this list? So again, I'm going to try and give you 30 seconds to think about this and add more items to the list if you can. And if you'd like to comment or put your items in the comment section, feel free to do so. So you can have a look through it together and see whether or not they are, something that you could talk about in your essay or in the interview itself. Okay, so 30 seconds to consider this. All right, so I hope you're ready with your list. So you can compare what you've got with mine. Here is a list of other factors that could contribute to people's happiness. For example, we're talking about basic needs here, like access to food, access to water, access to shelter. So if you have all these things, these basic things, that would, definitely make you, I think, content in life, content with life, as well as, having all your basic needs met. You could also talk about climate, how this could also contribute to people's happiness, how people are much happier in the summer compared to in the winter, and vice versa, and so on. You could also discuss the amount of leisure time that people have. Okay, so what I mean is something about work and balance. So sometimes if you feel overworked and stressed out and you don't have enough time to spend with your family or to pursue your own hobbies or interests, that could also affect how much or how content you are with your life, or how happy you feel about your life. So you could talk about this as a contributing factor to what makes people happy. At the same time, you have this other thing to consider, which is access to nature. Some people feel a lot happier if they're among nature and wildlife, like birds and trees and flowers. Something nice to look at and explore. So, as opposed to living in a concrete jungle. You could use this as a sort of argument to talk about why people go on holidays back to nature, because they want to feel that they have a right balance when they come home and start work again. They feel refreshed and much happier after having made contact with nature, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you could also talk about this. And finally, you could discuss the pace of life. In other words, how busy a person is. So if you have a very hectic working schedule, which gives you very little time to spend with your family or to engage in your hobbies, and interests, then maybe that could also be something worth talking about in terms of how busy you are with your life in general. Okay, so so these are the things that could be useful for you when you have to write an essay about it, or when you have to discuss this in part 3 of your speaking interview. Okay, so think about that a little bit more after this lesson and see what you can add to this list. Okay, now what we're going to do next is take a look at the passage or the text that we have gone over the past few lessons. Now these words or these adjectives are taken from the passage, The Pursuit of Happiness. So what I'd like you to consider are the opposites of these adjectives. What do you think could be the opposites of these words? So in some cases, you can add a prefix, which means adding a few letters before the word, or a suffix, which means adding a few letters after the word. But in other cases, you may need to think of a completely different word. So this is up to you to consider what you need to do to form the opposites of these words. So we'll look at these words in the context of the passage later on. So I'm going to give you some time to find the opposites of these adjectives. Okay, so as usual, I'm going to give you some time to think about this, but I'm going to give you a bit longer because I think this list is quite long. I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 words. So perhaps 5 minutes for you to consider finding out what these adjectives are. Okay, so 5 minutes to write down the opposites of these adjectives starting now. Okay, so that's about 5 minutes. I hope you've been able to find the correct answers to the opposites of these words or these adjectives. So let's start off first with the word satisfied. Now, what do you think is the opposite of this word? Now, if you have added a prefix to this word, then you have got the answer absolutely right. Okay, so the opposite of satisfied is dissatisfied. Now, let's take a look at how this is used in context. You can see that is actually formed in line 6. Yeah. The latest global analysis of happiness and satisfaction levels shows that the most satisfied people tend to live in Latin America, Western Europe, and North America, whereas Eastern Europeans are the least satisfied. So the opposite of this word would be dissatisfied. Okay, moving on to the next word, which is risky. Now, what do you think the opposite could be here? Now, we can't really add a prefix or a suffix here because I don't think that works. So let's use a completely different word. In other words, safe. Okay, so we know from the context, let's look at the word used in context here, which is in line 24. We can now show which behaviors are risky as far as happiness goes. So risky here actually means dangerous. We can show which behaviors are dangerous. So the opposite of dangerous would be safe. All right. So if you put safe, I think you could give yourself 1 point there. Okay. Now, unwise. Now, this is a giveaway, basically, because it has already got a prefix, which is un. Yeah. And so the opposite of unwise is just obviously wise. Okay. Now, precise. Line 31. What could be the meaning of the word precise? Let's take a look at how this is used in the context of a sentence. For one thing, the word happiness has no precise equivalent in some languages. So precise here actually means accurate or exact equivalent. So what do you think could be the meaning of exact? The opposite meaning. Okay. Well, you can say not exact, but I think we're trying to see if we can put a prefix or a suffix here. So I think the best option would be imprecise. Okay, that's the opposite. Now, meaningful already has a suffix attached to this. So meaningful, let's take a look again at how this is used in context. In line 35, to get a better idea, researchers ask people to take a step back and consider how satisfied they are with their lives overall and how meaningful they judge their lives to be. How meaningful. So opposite of full, what do you think it could be? So if you have put the suffix or replaced the suffix full with less, you're right there. Okay, so meaningful, meaningless. Okay. Now, collectivist, line 44. What could the opposite mean? So let's check out what the meaning is from the context that it's being used. Meanwhile, in the more collectivist nations of Asia, now we know that collectivist bears a similarity with the word collect, collection. So it could be something to do with group, couldn't it? Yeah, so we could, think that it has something to do with a group of nations of Asia. So the opposite of group here would be possibly individual. So all I think you've got to do here is to maybe replace the word collect with individual. So we have we keep the suffix ist at the end, but we just replace the word collect with individual. So opposite of collectivist would be individualist. Okay? Now, inferior, line 46. Now, what could that be? Inferior, line 46. How is it used in context? One of the consequences of such an attitude is that you don't have to feel inferior or guilty about not being very happy. So opposite of inferior here would be perhaps superior. Okay, so opposite of inferior, superior. And then we have significant from line 57. 57. Over here, one of the most significant observations to come from research findings is, so significant here could possibly mean important. It's one of the most important observations to come. So the opposite of important is unimportant, but we're not looking at the word important here, we're looking at significant. So could you put a prefix or a suffix before or after the word? Let's see. So significant, the opposite should be with a prefix before the word significant. So we've got insignificant rather than using a suffix, okay? So significant, insignificant, just like important, important, unimportant. And then we have competitive, which you can find in line 85. Let's have a look here. In view of these findings, oh, sorry, wrong line. Yeah. Paradoxically, by striving too hard to climb the global happiness of rankings, governments are in danger of turning the pursuit of happiness into yet another competitive quest for status. Competitive. So we know from the base word, well, you know from how it's structured, it has a base word, compete or competition. Yeah. So the opposite of this could be uncompetitive, maybe a prefix. Yeah. So give yourself 1 mark if you've got the opposite with a prefix here, with un. Okay, good. Now, miserable, also from the same paragraph, I think, line 86. How is that used in context? Just what the researchers have shown is a sure path to making people miserable. So, miserable here means unhappy. Okay? So, what could the opposite be? I think I've just given you the answer. So, unhappy, miserable. So, the opposite would be happy. I think a completely different word. You can't add a prefix, you can't add a suffix to the word at all. Okay, so how did you do in this little exercise? Did you get 10 out of 10? Okay, so share your marks in the comment box and tell me how you're doing with this particular exercise. Okay, are we ready to move on? Lovely. Okay, so we're going to still look at the same passage, but this time we're going to explore it a little bit further. We're going to look at the verbs over-report and under-report. Okay, what do you understand by the verbs over-report and under-report? So this is trying to deal with unfamiliar vocabulary in context. So let's look for the word over-report first and under-report. How is that used in line 48? Let's go back to the passage. Okay, let's try a different colour this time. Over-report. Okay, so we can find over-report in line 43, but that comes from this sentence. Yun Cook Maxo at Yonsei University in Seoul thinks this pressure to be happy could lead people to over-report how happy they feel. And then we have something here, which in turn could lead people to under-report. Now, what do you think the meanings could be? So we've got like a combination of over and under being used. So I think with a suffix, or sorry, not a suffix, a prefix like over and under, it could easily quite tell you what the meaning of this is. So over-report in this context means to exaggerate. Okay, so in the context of this passage, it means, it refers to people who say that they are happier than they really are. So it leads people to report too much on how happy they are. So when they're, in fact, maybe they're 60% happy, but when they over-report, they might say that they're 90% happy. So what they've done here, they've exaggerated or they've over-reported on how happy they are. So it's the same thing for under-report. In this context, it means to say things that are not as bad as they are. So in this passage, it refers to the fact that they are not that happy. So if you under-report how happy you are, that you're basically saying that things are not bad when they are actually in fact quite bad. Yeah, so you're under-reporting. So if someone asks you, "How are you?" and if you've been, suffering from an illness, your pet cat has just recently died, and your best friend has moved to another country, so when you're feeling miserable, but yet you say to the speaker, "Well, not bad." "How are you?" "Not bad." So basically what you're doing is you're under-reporting how happy you feel. Okay, so you can basically deduce what the meanings of these words are from over and under. So this is one way of dealing with unfamiliar vocabulary. So if you see something similar to this, I think you could easily understand what the verbs mean. What other verbs do you know have these prefixes? Like, apart from over-report or under-report, what other verbs can you think of? Okay, so I'm going to give you maybe 5 minutes again to think, or maybe 3 minutes. 5 is a bit long. 3 minutes for you to write down a list of words that you think have very similar structures to over-report and under-report. Okay, so 3 minutes to write down as quickly as you can on your paper. And if you want to share it in the comment section, you're more than welcome to do that so we can see what you've got in your answers. Okay, 3 minutes starting now. Okay, so that's a good 3 minutes. Let's try and see if your answers match some of mine, okay? So if you've got the same answers, then give yourself, or you can just cross it off your list. But if you've got an answer that's quite different from mine, then give yourself 1 mark. So let's see if you can play this game with me, okay? Same answers, cross it off your list. You don't have any marks for that. But if you have a different answer, give yourself 1 mark. And you can tally up the total at the end, okay? So let's start with one of the things that I've got here, which is overbook. Let me just put the list there. Okay, overbook. We've got overcharge. Okay, a restaurant can overcharge you. Overcook. So if you're not very good at doing things in the kitchen, then you might overcook your food. And then we have overdo something. Okay, that means to do something longer than necessary or more than necessary, and so on. And then we've got overeat, which can be quite dangerous. So overeating could lead to obesity. So that's something that you could use. And then we've got overestimate. Okay, don't overestimate how much time you have in the reading section. And then we have overload. You know, if you've got too much information coming to you all at once, you are suffering from information overload or work overload, perhaps at the office. And then we have overpay. So if you pay too much for something, overreact. It means that you are reacting too much over something that is only a small matter. So if you're overreacting, maybe you've been crying over a movie, or if you're overreacting in a situation, maybe you've become angry over a small matter. So that's more of a negative connotation, I think. And then we've got oversimplify. Okay, so try not to oversimplify certain issues because it can be quite complicated. And then we have overspend, which can be quite dangerous if you do this with your credit cards. And then we have overstate. That means I think to make a statement that's, I think, quite exaggerated. And then we've got overwork, which is quite similar to overload, having a work overload. Or don't overwork yourself. This is something that you can use to advise someone. And then we have undercharge, which is the opposite of overcharge. To charge very little for something. Underestimate, opposite of overestimate. Underpay. Okay, and then we have underrate. Don't underrate the value of something. So if you have been, for example, if you've just recently downloaded an app from Android or from store, you can, you don't use it because you think that it's unimportant, where in fact it's quite important. So, your friend tells you, don't underrate the importance of this app because it can help you save time. Okay, so that's a very complicated explanation of this, but I think you get the general idea. All right, and then we have understate, which is the opposite of overstate, and then we have undervalue. All right, so we're not going to go too much into the meanings of each of these words. If you're not sure of what they mean, have a look at at your dictionary. Look up the dictionary for how it's being used in context rather than just for the meaning, because it's important that you know how to use these words in context when you write your essay or when you present your arguments, to not think of them as a synonym for something that you can just, cut and paste. Remember that not all synonyms can be substituted. You have to understand how to use them in context. And, looking at how this is written down or listening to how this is said, I think is quite important. It's just as important as understanding the meaning of the word itself. Okay, so if you do have a vocabulary notebook or a vocabulary list, try not to just write down the meaning. Try to write down how this is being used in the context of a sentence to make sure that this is acceptable in an essay or in a speaking situation. Okay, so just a little tip for you there to know how to note down vocabulary properly. Okay, so how did you do? Any of the words here appeared in the in your list? So okay, so if you've got a lot of words that did not appear on my list, well done. Okay, so if you have a lot of words that are very similar to my list, great minds think alike. So there you go. Okay, so let's move on from vocabulary. Well, not from vocabulary, but we're still going to be dealing with vocabulary anyway. What I mean is we're going to take a look at some more words related to the passage, and we're going to take a look at the word consumerism. Okay, so let me just cover this up so that you do not get distracted by all of the answers here. So what do you understand by the word consumerism? Now, we've got a suffix ism, which is quite common in the English language, and it usually forms the noun component of a word. So we've got the base word consumer, and then we've got ism. So a consumer, what do you think it could be? If you know the meaning, type out the answer in the comments section. Okay? Right. Now, consumerism basically means the desire to acquire consumer goods and use services. Okay? So consumerism is that desire to buy things or to buy services. So consumerism is also a sort of a lifestyle. Okay, so you can say something like, we live in a consumerist society. Let's see how this is used in the context of a sentence in the passages. You can find this in line 59. A growing number of researchers are putting this down to consumerism. Okay? All right, so you can use this as well when arguing your points, because we live in an age of consumerism. Everybody wants to buy the latest products that are out in the market. You can use the same thing in your IELTS essay as well. So as I've mentioned here, it means the desire to buy or to get or to acquire consumer goods and use services. So can you think of other words that end with ism here that could be useful for when you argue your points in an essay or in an IELTS speaking interview? So I'm just going to give you maybe about I think 60 seconds this time to think about other words that end with ism. Okay, starting now. Okay, so how did you do? All right. You can list out some of the words there in the comments section if you want to share it with everyone. So I've got some other words ending in ism, but they're more or less grouped by meaning. So let's compare your answers with some of the ideas I've got here. So we've talked about the meaning of the word consumerism. So that's the definition there. We could classify ism according to political or religious belief. So we've got political beliefs like socialism, conservatism, liberalism, feminism, and then we've got the religious beliefs like Buddhism, Judaism, Sikhism, etc. You can also classify them according to attitudes and abstract qualities. What do I mean by this? You can look at some of the examples here. Fanaticism, racism, sexism, cynicism, idealism. Okay, so you can talk about them in your essay or in your arguments when you're doing your interview. Talk about the fight to reduce sexism at the workplace. You could also talk about the idealism of some people, and so on and so forth. And then we have isms that can be classified under creative, artistic movements. Okay, such as Cubism. So if you are an artist or if you're a student of art and you're familiar with Pablo Picasso's work, you would notice that he uses this technique called Cubism. And then we have Expressionism, Impressionism, Surrealism, Postmodernism. You can also use it not just for art, but for literature as well. Okay, so some of these things are worth exploring. Some of these words are worth exploring and can be quite useful for you in favor of arguing your points in either the essay or speaking part 3. Okay, so, all right. If you have no questions in the comment section, let's move on to the next task here. Now, if you have an online dictionary open, that's good. If you have a printed or published dictionary, that's even better. Can you check the difference in meaning between these compound adjectives? So we can find hard-headed, an example there of hard-headed, line 72. Why is this called a compound adjective? Because we've got a combination of hard and headed, okay, both of which are adjectives. So let's see how this is used in context in line 72, hard-headed. Let's go back a few steps. Line 72, these days, even hard-headed economists tend to agree that the key to blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we've got even here as a sort of a clue to tell you that hard-headed is not really quite common among economists. So what do you think that could mean, hard-headed? Okay, I'll give you a few seconds to check your dictionary and see if you know what that means and apply it to this context. Okay, so I'll give you a minute to do this. Okay, so how do we do? Hard-headed. What could the meaning of this be? So if you've got your meanings typed out in the comment section, good. Yeah, it basically means not allowing emotions or feelings to affect your opinions or your decisions. Okay? So if you are a hard-headed person, that means you're able to make decisions without allowing your feelings to interfere with your decision. So maybe another word for this could be objective, even the most objective economists. Okay, but I think hard-headed sounds a bit stronger. So we could define this as saying that hard-headed means not allowing emotions to affect opinions excuse me, and decisions. Okay? Now, can you think of other meanings with these compound adjectives here? Hard-hearted, hard-pressed, and hard-nosed. Without looking at the dictionary, what do you think? What can you guess from these words? What do you think the meanings are? You can type your comments below, and we'll check whether or not they are correct. Okay, let's start with hard-hearted. Okay, so it's something to do with the heart. So the opposite of hard-hearted would be soft-hearted. So if you're a very soft-hearted person, you're a very kind person. You're very soft, very gentle. Okay, so hard-hearted is just the opposite. It just means that you are unkind, or you have no sympathy or feeling whatsoever. So if you're a hard-hearted person, you're not very charitable to people who are suffering, maybe. If you're using this in a negative sense, if you are a hard-hearted person, you can also be called cruel. Yeah, cruel as in unkind. Oops, that's a bit too big, isn't it? Let's yeah, I think that should be the right size. Cruel, I think, would be the word we're looking for. Another word for hard-hearted. Okay, what about hard-pressed? Now, press has got nothing to do with ironing or pressing a button. Okay, so I think press would be more similar to something to do with pressure. Yeah, so if you feel pressed, how do you think you feel? Pressured, okay. So if you're feeling pressed or hard pressed, I think it would be safe for you to excuse me, to say that you're experiencing difficulties or feeling under great pressure. Okay? Now, hard nose. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with your nose or your physical appearance. Okay? This is, I think, purely idiomatic. So if you're hard-nosed, if you're a hard-nosed person, if you're a hard-nosed individual, you are a very tough person, or someone who is not easily influenced by emotional considerations or easily influenced by feelings. Okay, so you could be a hard-nosed detective, okay, or I suppose it could be a hard-nosed teacher. I haven't heard that being used before, but yeah, why not? Okay, so hard-nosed. See if you can find these words being used in the context of various sentences for you to try and use it on your own in the interview or the IELTS essay. Okay? So hopefully this will help you with understanding passages as well, reading passages. If you come across compound adjectives like these, if you come across words with ism, or words with over or under, that should give you a clue as to deducing what their meanings are. Okay, so let's move on to more vocabulary exercises. Now here we've got on the left column a list of verbs: to draw up, to fulfill, to gather, to meet, to suffer, with some of the matching endings in red. Now they do not correspond to the words on the left. So what you're going to have to do is to match the words on the left to the red words on the right. Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute to try to match them up for me. So if you've got a pen and paper ready, just try to do it very quickly. Make very quick notes. Okay, all right, so let's check your answers to see if they match the ones I have here. Now, to draw up, what can you say for to draw up? So if you've put that as data, you're absolutely right. So you can draw up, sorry, not data, league table. So you can draw up a table. Fulfill, I think you can safely just leave it where it is. To fulfill expectations, or you can also fulfill someone's needs in another example. Gather, I think you can gather data. Meet, you can also meet someone's needs. You can just leave it there as it is. Or you can also meet expectations. So there you go. You've got fulfill and meet. You can substitute one for the other. And to suffer symptoms. Okay, so you can suffer symptoms of fatigue and so on. So how did you do there? All correct? Well done. Give yourself a big fat star for having got all the answers right. Okay, so I'm afraid we're going to have to stop here for now. Actually, we've got one more exercise here for you to do. We've got a vocabulary section where I'm going to ask you to try to put these words that we've looked at before in the context of sentences. See how you're going to be doing with these. Okay, so have a look at the sentences first before I start the timer. Okay, and the words that you see here at the bottom in red are the words that we have already discussed in the previous page. So see if you can match the words in red and put them in the context of a sentence from number 1 to number 5. Okay, so I'll give you about 5 minutes to do this, starting now. Okay, so how do we do? Let's check your answers against the ones we have here. Starting with number 1. In their investigations, social scientists gather data from many different sources. Okay, so gather data. Now, number 2, even businesses which make substantial profits can fail. I think here we need to add a to, perhaps. Can fail to fulfill the expectations of the financial markets. Okay, so here you've got to consider the correct grammatical form. So if you have got the answer right but the wrong grammar form, you need to change that to fit the context of the sentence. And I think I may have mentioned that this is particularly important in sentence completion tasks as well as summary completion tasks, to make sure that your answers fit the grammatical structure in the sentence. Okay, increasing numbers of people in the developed world are suffering the symptoms of hay fever and other allergies. Okay. Next, education authorities in Britain, okay, draw up annual league tables. So I think we need to separate the two here. Let's try and do that. To draw up annual league tables showing which are the best and worst schools in the area. And I think the same needs to be done for number 5. Research is currently being undertaken to look at how universities could meet. Okay. Yeah. Meet the needs of individual students. Okay, so how did you do? 5 out of 5? 4 out of 5? 3, 2, 1, 0? Okay. Comments if you've got 5 out of 5 or 4 out of 5. Well done if you've got most of your answers right, which brings me to the end of today's session. Okay, so thank you if you've been following me from the very first lesson, and I hope you have had a lot of information that you could use to put to your own reading practice. Try and join me next week, because I'm going to be doing these Facebook Lives on the same day at the same time here, if you want to learn more about the IELTS test. You can also go to my website here to join in our email list to get free IELTS tips every week in your inbox. Okay, don't forget to check out my YouTube channel as well. So on Facebook Live, we'll be doing more interactive Q&A content like this, but we're also trying to post weekly videos to YouTube. So definitely have a look at that. Okay, so all right, so basically that's it. Thanks so much for watching this broadcast. And if you will, let me know what kind of topics would you want me to cover in future broadcasts. So try to post those comments below. And also when it comes to understanding what to do or what not to do in the IELTS test, as I've mentioned, I do have a blog that tells you all about this. You can get that information at www.theieltstutor.edublogs.org. That's .org, not .com. Okay, .org, for entirely free. Okay, because in this blog I break down some of the information and the IELTS question types that you need to familiarize yourself with, so that you can be confident and ready for the test itself. So do have a look at that as well. All right, so until next time, keep doing well. And if you need IELTS lessons, don't hesitate to reach out to me at theieltstutor.com. We will talk soon. Goodbye and have a nice week ahead.